Today's podcast is brought to you by Blue Canary. The bird has landed on beautiful Bainbridge Island, conveniently located at 499 Madison Avenue. ASE Master Technician Clint Ramsey brings over 15 years of experience, award-winning diagnostic skill, and a desire to reinvent the automotive repair experience. Schedule an appointment online at bluecanary.biz or call them today at 206-451-4220.
I'm Maria Metzler, the Executive Director of Helpline House. The global pandemic has affected us all differently. If you or your neighbors need food assistance, mental health counseling, rental assistance, or Parks and Rec vouchers, please reach out. Helpline House can help in many ways. Find us on the web at helplinehouse.org. It's what we do. Neighbor helping neighbor.
I got something for your mind, body, and soul. I got something for your mind, body, and soul.
You have found the B.I.STANDER Podcast. Now here's your host with the most, Tiny Tim.
What's good, Podcastville? You found the B.I.STANDER Podcast. Today, my guest is Scott Hamilton from Leeham News. How you doing, sir?
I'm doing well. Thanks for having me on board, Tim.
It's good to see you. I think I saw you taking takeout the other day, and that's about it. I haven't seen you for a good year, like since pre-COVID.
Well, it's been tough, and fortunately now my wife and I have both vaccinations. We're raring to go. Last week we went to dinner out and a movie. It was like old Friday night date night.
Happy for you. That sounds like exactly what I'd like to do right now. I think that's what I miss the most of COVID is the socialization around meals.
Yeah, just getting around town and talking to people and getting into to have dinner with people, and it's been a tough year.
Yeah. So Scott is a media publisher with the topic of aviation. You've been doing this for quite some time. What got you started in writing and aviation?
Well, I actually became a journalist right out of community college back in 1979. Back in 1971. And in 1979, I went to work for the airline industry, knocked around that for about 5 years. And in 1985, went back into journalism, writing about the airline industry. In 1989, I formed a company with two British colleagues, which we sold 10 years later. And then I became a consultant, a community activist over in Sammamish, where I lived at the time. I went on the planning commission over there. In 2008, I created Leeham News, which is an online newsletter about commercial aviation. And I've been doing that since 2008.
Do you have a plan of selling this corporation at some point?
Well, I'd like to. I'm past retirement age, and as we were doing this, I've had to continue to work to help pay for the house.
Yeah, it's not the cheapest place to live on Earth, right here on the island.
And setting aside the politics of it all, because I don't really want to get into that. Just as we were going out to bid, Donald Trump took over in the White House. He imposed a 20% tariff on Canadian wood, which is where a lot of the wood comes to build here on the island. So immediately all our wood costs went up 20%.
That's crazy.
Yeah. And then the building boom started, so concrete cost goes up, and all of that led into major cost hikes that we hadn't planned on. And then, of course, you get into change orders that are just part of what goes on. you get into breaking ground for the foundation, and you hit on the south end of the island in particular, yellow clay, which is, to use the technical term, it's like snot. And, it just goes up and up.
Yeah, I'm not so knowledgeable about import, export, and tariffs, but I know that this COVID times has really made me want to continue to source things correctly and buy local and try to get things that are less traveled. And, I'm pretty sure there's wood in America, just like there's wood in Canada. It's kind of a crazy system how we get these deals done. I think the first time when I was a little kid, there was something to do with asparagus. We could grow asparagus in Washington really, really well. And then all of a sudden it kind of became against the law to grow asparagus in Washington because we had an import deal with some other country that grew asparagus exclusively. And I was just like, how did politics get into my food,
Yeah, who knows?
Crazy. So there's been a lot in the last 2 years going on with the airline industry, even before COVID hit. What are some of the big takeaways that COVID has changed the flight industry?
Well, the pandemic, of course, has completely upended passenger travel. It's closed borders around the globe, particularly in Europe and here in North America. We can't go into Canada. Canadians can't come into the United States except under very limited circumstances. Within Europe, travel is done. You can't really come from Europe to the United States and vice versa, except under very limited circumstances. For here in the Puget Sound in particular, of course, that hurts Boeing. And Boeing was under great pressure anyway because of the grounding of the 737 MAX beginning in March of 2019. The COVID pandemic really took root in March of 2020. The wide-body demand is completely dried up, which, again, for Boeing, because the MAX was grounded, that was where they were getting their cash flow in their commercial aircraft operations. They were doing 14 airplanes a month for the 787. They're down to 5. They're consolidating production in South Carolina. The 777 demand has completely dried up. They're only producing 2 777s a month right now, and most of those are freighters. The 777X isn't certified. The MAX is now recertified, but they're delivering 450 airplanes out of inventory, very few out of new production. And it's going to be years before Boeing gets back to any semblance of normalcy. Airbus is not quite the same way because, of course, they didn't have an airplane that was grounded. But the overall reduction of production for the A320, the A330, the A350 has all been impacted because of the pandemic.
And that turns into billions of dollars of loss when they don't have new orders for new planes, correct?
Oh, absolutely. And again, Boeing's position is exacerbated because of the grounding of the MAX for 20 months. Boeing had to go out and borrow something, I think it was $27 billion. They're going out to borrow some more to continue to work its way through this. It's just been devastating on Boeing, and of course for Puget Sound, it's been devastating to the workforce as well.
Now, you're going to have to refresh my memory because I only have bits and pieces of my memory left at all. But regarding Boeing, wasn't there talks about them pulling out of Everett and Washington State altogether over something?
Well, there's been that talk all along, and the same thing with Renton. It's my view that once the 737 line finally closes, just as a natural life cycle, which would be around the 2033 era, I think Renton production will close, and the rest of that whole factory there, which at one point was about twice as big a footprint in all respects, it will be closed. The commercial project and the residential project called the Landing over in Renton off of 405 is all where 757 and other 737 work used to be. 757, of course, discontinued production in 2005, and Boeing undertook what was then called the move to the lake. Well, when the 737 production finally ends next decade, I think you'll see the balance of that close. Now, up in Everett, Boeing, particularly when you had the 777X program that was going to be launched in 2013, Boeing threatened to move that production elsewhere unless the union and the state came up with concessions, the state coming up with tax breaks, the union doing givebacks on health care and pension costs. So Boeing has held it over our head here many times about, well, if you don't do what we want, and if you don't give us what we want, we'll move production elsewhere. That's how the second 787 line wound up in Charleston. And with that, that's why the first line is now closing in Everett and moving to Charleston as a result of the pandemic.
What does the MAX part of the 737 mean?
Well,
there's a couple planes that are called MAX, right?
Well, you've got a 4-member family. You have the MAX 7, the MAX 8, the MAX 9, and the MAX 10. And it's for maximum flexibility, maximum range, maximum performance, maximum economy. That was the theory behind the name MAX. And, of course, MAX being just a shortened version of maximum.
Okay. So what is it, Alaska Airlines that Russell Wilson is involved in?
Yeah. Or
quarterback of the Seahawks.
I'm not sure if he still is, but yes.
And shout out to Greg Nance, the ultimate runner on the island, who has a commercial for them as well. Russell had this weird post a while back where he kept saying unlimited. I'm Mr. Unlimited. And a lot of people thought he was a little off his rocker. So I'm wondering if that airline's going to go with 737 Unlimited Russ edition if he stays.
Yeah, I don't know. And of course, we've been seeing the reports in the newspapers about the possibility of Wilson being traded somewhere, and he's unhappy. He's complained about being sacked all the time, and for that, he has a very legitimate complaint. But I don't know, the last 2 seasons, it seems like in the second half of the season, his throwing arm has been really good to the other team.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm not fully convinced that Russ is any longer indispensable to the Seattle Seahawks.
Yeah, correct. And I think wherever you're going to go, you're going to find yourself on your butt in the NFL. I don't care how good you are.
That's true, but the offensive line has a lot of work to do to protect the quarterback, whoever it is, because the last several seasons, well, really since, frankly, the second Super Bowl, which Russell did a nice 1-yard line pass interception, the offensive line has just really kind of stood aside and given a written invitation to the other team, and Russell winds up on his rear end many, many times in many games.
Yeah, I mean, I feel like the organization has tried with free agents and drafts, and things just have not worked out. I'm one of those guys that think he should throw the ball sooner, but some of that playground stuff is pretty exciting to watch too.
Yeah, if you watch Tom Brady, and believe me, I'm no Tom Brady fan, but you have to admire his skill and his work. He gets rid of that ball almost as soon as he touches it.
Yeah, I think it's like a 4-step drop, 2 seconds.
He had a rough time with the Panthers early on in the season where the offensive line was just kind of standing aside, and he got sacked quite a bit. Mm-hmm. But over the years, Brady would get rid of that ball almost immediately, while Russell, and give him credit for being twinkle toes, he would dance around the backfield a lot, trying to avoid all those defensive players that his offensive line let through.
Yeah. Well, it'll be interesting off season for sure.
Yeah.
Same with the Sounders losing Jordan Morris to ACL injury as well.
Yeah.
But we're here to talk about some planes and the island here. So what are the main competitors to Boeing? Is that Airbus and Virgin?
Well, no, it's just Airbus. It's really a duopoly now. There are emerging, well, really one serious emerging competitor, and that's China. China really won't be a serious competitor for another generation. They're working on an airplane called the Comac C919, which is basically the same airplane to compete against the 737 and the A320. And it's already about 7 or 8 years late because building airplanes is hard. It's difficult. It's the integration of everything is tremendous. Learning how to certify the airplane. They wanted to put the airplane in service in 2016, maybe even a little earlier. I think they'll be lucky to get it in service next year. So I guess it's really 6 years, but nevertheless, it'll take them another generation. The C919 will not be an even level playing field competitor with the 320 or the 737. But it's the next airplane and the next airplane after that Boeing and Airbus really have to worry about.
Is China going to make it out of cheap plastic and say made in China on the side of it too?
Well, who knows? Right now, the bigger challenge is ending the trade war that Trump started with China. China is not hasn't placed a new order for Boeing airplanes since 2017 when Trump started the trade war. While Airbus has been selling airplanes to China up until the pandemic time. And China so far is refusing to recertify the 737 MAX.
Yeah,
China claims that it has technical questions remaining, but the conventional wisdom within the aviation circles is that they're not going to recertify the airplane until the trade war is over.
Now, Boeing sits at the table of certification of airplanes. So they're basically inspecting their own thing and certifying it. Is Airbus duly granted that same opportunity?
Yeah, it's really by necessity. It's not fully self-certification because the agency, the FAA here in this country, EASA in Europe for Airbus, they do the certification, but you have designated representatives from Boeing for the FAA and Airbus for EASA, because just from a pure practical standpoint, neither regulator has the resources that are needed to do all the work themselves. And they don't have the engineers who design the airplanes. They don't have the people with the inherent institutional knowledge. Pardon me. And this is true in the U.S. with the Food and Drug Administration. The industry kind of regulates itself or inspects itself.
Mm-hmm.
All of that is just the nature of the beast. What happened here with the MAX controversy is that the FAA gave Boeing too much authority over what it was doing and didn't exercise enough oversight. And that's coming back a little bit. Now the FAA is really in Boeing's knickers, if you will. And quite frankly, that's part of the problem why the certification of the 777X is delayed. That was supposed to enter service in either December of 2019 or the first quarter of 2020. And there was about a 9-month delay because GE, the engine provider, had to go back and redesign some stuff with the engine. And then the MAX grounding happened, and the certification scrutiny occurred, and it didn't take a rocket scientist to figure out that with the FAA under fire for the MAX certification process, that they would go back and take a look at everything they were doing for the 777X. And now Boeing is going to be lucky to see that enter service in late 2023. You have Emirates Airline, which is the largest customer for the 777X, already saying that it may not be until 2024.
So if you can you bring the listeners back into speed here about the timeline of when that plane was introduced and the first crash? I think it was Ethiopia was the first crash of that
Lion
plane?
Air was the first crash. Ethiopian was the second. Yeah, the MAX program was launched in July of 2011 with an order from American Airlines. And Boeing was actually maneuvered into launching the MAX program as opposed to a brand new design because Airbus went into American and was poised to sell them 400 airplanes. And American, up until that point, had been an exclusive Boeing customer. So Airbus went in, they were poised to sell them up to 400 airplanes. And that prompted Jim McNerney, the CEO of Boeing at the time in Chicago, to go forward and launch the re-engined 737, which later became known as the MAX. Jim Allball, who was the CEO of Boeing Commercial Airplanes here in Seattle, wanted to go forward with a brand new airplane. Boeing at that point had not yet had its first flight of the 787. That program was billions of dollars in cost overruns. It was years late. They hadn't had the first flight of the 747-8. That was running late. It was running over budget. The KC-46 program had just been awarded in February of 2011 by the Pentagon. As we now know, that's billions of dollars behind budget and behind schedule. So Boeing had a lot of financial pressures going on at the time. So they launched the derivative of the 737 that they thought this ought to be an easy program. One of the reasons that it took from 2011 to May of 2017 for the first delivery and entry into service is that it had a new engine that was being put on the airplane called a LEAP engine, which was bigger and had a larger diameter than the CFM56 that was on the 737 that was in service at the time. And that became important and relevant to these crashes that later occurred. But Boeing hoped that they would get that airplane to the customer on time and on budget to prove that Boeing commercial airplanes could, in fact, deliver on its promises. Well, they actually beat the delivery by a couple of months, wound up the airplane was still about a couple $1 billion over budget, but the airlines didn't care. And so the airplane entered service with a Lion Air affiliate, Malindo Airways, in May of 2017. And in October 2018, about 18 months later, is when the Lion Air crash happened, the October 28th or 29th of 2018. And that airplane was only 5 months old, brand new airplane. Initially, Boeing dismissed the problem as being a pilot problem, an airline problem, which was kind of natural because Lion Air really has a poor safety record, or did at that time. Europe at one point had even banned Lion Air from flying to Europe. The safety was so bad. But as we now know, within a week of that accident, Boeing was taking a look at the Maneuvering Characteristic Augmentation System, MCAS, and they realized within a week that had some relevance to why the airplane crashed. The outside world really didn't know that immediately. But the MCAS is what would drive the nose down if it detected a stall. And we now know that it falsely detected a stall because the MCAS was hooked up only to one angle of attack sensor. I mean, this gets really detailed, and I don't know how much.
Wasn't there a lack of training about that software as well to the pilots?
Well, the pilots didn't even know about it because as we now know, Boeing took it out of the pilot manual, the training manual. And what we now know, and this is really ironic, is that Lion Air had asked Boeing for pilot simulator training, and Boeing said, you don't need it. So then we fast forward to the following March of 19, and that's when the Ethiopian Airlines accident happened on March 10th, local time, 2019. And again, it was an MCAS-triggered event where the plane took off, the AOA sensor failed. As far as I know, haven't discovered precisely why. They think it might have been a bird strike. and the plane kept the MCAS kept pushing the nose of the plane down, and that airplane never got higher than 800 feet, and it just nosed over and crashed.
And that's when they were
within 3 days. It was grounded worldwide.
And what's the current status of that airplane right now?
Well, the MCAS has been redesigned so that it doesn't repetitively push the nose down, and it's been redesigned so that it doesn't have the strength that it did. The pilots could not override the MAX with their own strength. Now they can, and the nose will only be pushed down once. And there are now 2 AOA sensor hookups, and Europe is requiring what's called a synthetic sensor for the 3rd AOA hookup. And the airplane was recertified by the FAA this past November. Europe's EASA recertified the airplane in January, just a couple months ago. Canada recertified it in January. Brazil recertified it. I believe that was in November. China has not recertified it. Australia has recertified it. So things are moving ahead. But now we're in the pandemic, and there aren't a lot of airlines that want very many of the airplanes. So it's going to take Boeing a good 2 years to burn off this inventory of 450 airplanes that they built but could not deliver during the grounding.
Wow. So there's 450 airplanes that are fully built right now that have no homes to go to?
Well, they have, most of them have homes. There have been about 100 cancellations of those that were already built, and those are now called whitetails. I think Alaska Airlines took a handful of whitetails. United Airlines is going to take 25 whitetails, I understand. But you have, and then there are some airlines that simply went out of business. Jet Airways was a customer. If you go by Renton, you'll see a number of 737s in Jet Airways colors. Same thing over at Boeing Field. That airline doesn't exist anymore, and those airplanes have to be resold. But yeah, there were a total of about 450 that were built during the grounding. Once the grounding was lifted, Boeing started to deliver some of those airplanes, as well as some new production line airplanes. They had restarted the production at very low rate, actually back in May. So they still have probably 400 of those airplanes. I think 50 of them may have been delivered by now.
My son had a couple questions for you that I want to relay from my 13-year-old. And I think it's relative to the nose dipping on those planes and the crash. He asked me to ask you, how much time does a pilot spend on autopilot while flying a plane? Kind of how does the autopilot work? And this is my question to wrap that up too, is was these crashes during autopilot, or were they manning the plane at the time?
Yeah, both crashes happened shortly after takeoff. Lion Air was in climb out. It got as high as 5,000 feet, roughly. The plane was not on autopilot. In fact, if the plane was on autopilot, the MCAS did not engage. Ethiopian was on climb out again. It only got about 800 feet. It was under manual control. How much time is a plane on autopilot? Well, basically anytime it's at cruising altitude or probably once the flaps come up on takeoff, the plane probably goes on to autopilot. Once the airplane is landing, pretty much once you get down to the point where you're starting to lower the flaps, I think you will generally see the pilot taking over and flying it manually. There is what's called Category 3 auto land, where in inclement weather, the airplane can actually land itself, and then the pilot takes over after the plane is on the runway, and he'll activate the thrust reversers and steer onto the taxiway and so on. That's generally, that is an incredibly simplistic way to answer the question. Now, a pilot certainly can fly the airplane if he's at altitude or at any point during the flight And some pilots like to do that to keep their skills up. But it's pretty rare that you'll see a pilot actually flying the airplane during the cruise part of the flight.
Okay. And does it work kind of like your car cruise control?
Well, it's more than that. The cruise control on a car only affects the speed of the car. Mm-hmm. And the driver is still steering it. He's still braking it. He's still controlling the car. It would probably be more like the auto drive that's in Tesla, where you sit back and the car drives. You're not supposed to fall asleep. You're not supposed to divert your attention. Just as a pilot in an airborne airplane isn't supposed to fall asleep or divert his attention. He's still supposed to monitor the instruments. He's still supposed to keep an eye out the window. And it would be the analogy would be closer to the Tesla auto system for us laymen to understand that. It's much more sophisticated than cruise control.
All right. What do you know about that UFO that was spotted 2 weeks ago?
Only what I read in the papers. Don't know a damn thing about it.
Have you ever done an article on UFOs?
Nope.
Okay. Do you believe in them?
Well, I guess the answer is kind of it depends. In the typical context of UFO, you mean an unidentified flying object from outer space? Why not? I mean, after all, we're putting UFOs on Mars. We're putting UFOs on the moon. If you were a little moon resident, what the hell is that? Most UFOs, I think, are natural phenomena or secret things out of Area 51.
That's interesting that they're opening up all that documentation about that after so long.
Yeah, well, I think there's probably a lot more documentation they're not opening up than they are.
Yeah, there's things called, what is it, redaction?
Yes.
He's just going to cross himself out of that name, out of that piece of paper. It's never there. Do you have a favorite airplane movie? Like Airplane?
Well, that was obviously a very good send-up. Airplane 2 wasn't very good, but the first Airplane was a good send-up of the disaster movies that came out shortly after the movie Airport. I like The High and the Mighty. I like Island in the Sky, going back to the 1950s with John Wayne. Those were based on actual events, so there was truth weaved in with the storyline. Airport, the original Airport with Dean Martin and Jacqueline Bisset. I love Jacqueline Bisset. So
I love Dean Martin. Dino's my guy.
Yeah. There've been bombs and all that stuff, but they're really, that was a completely fictional story for the most part. The storylines in there were really, pretty bad
Mm-hmm.
when you come right down and look at it. I don't think you see an airport manager really going out to basically help kind of dig an airplane out of the mud. It was an entertaining movie. In terms of realism, there was a TV movie about United Airlines Flight 232 that crashed in Sioux City back in 1989, and on TV it was called The Rescue of Flight 232. Now it's called 1,000 Heroes, and that's a really good movie in terms of being factual and the rescue efforts and the cockpit coordination of the flight in distress. So I would say, in terms of high quality movies, that actually is probably my favorite.
I vaguely remember a story from my childhood where a sports team crashed and then they had to eat the dead to stay alive in the snow. And
yep.
Was that based on a true story at all?
That indeed was. It was up in the Andes.
Up in the Andes? What was the movie called, or the book?
Oh, there were actually two movies done, and I don't remember the name of either one of them. But I did see the movie, and this is back, in the 70s or 80s. Yeah. And it was a Fairchild F-27 turboprop that
You just bringing that out of your hat.
yeah, that did not climb high enough to get over the Andes, and it had what's called a controlled flight into terrain, a CFIT. And there were survivors, and as the injured died, to survive, others resorted to cannibalism. But that was a true story.
Yeah, that messed me up for a while.
It's tough to think about that, but if it comes down to survival,
they're dead already. I don't know.
Yeah.
What's the future for Boeing and the legislation here in Washington State? Is there a chance that a new type of plane is going to come out? What kind of demand for planes are there going to be here in the future? Because travel is definitely limited.
Well, travel should be coming back by the middle of the decade, if not by 23, 24, certainly by 25, again, absent any other things. And Boeing has to do a new airplane. The 737 just is not competitive with the A321. Airbus has a broad family of single-aisle airplanes that are selling well. The 737 is really on the back of the MAX 8, which is a 175-passenger airplane. The MAX 7 only has about 55 sales. The MAX 9 only about 250 sales. The MAX 10 only about 500 sales. You can't have a family that's built on the back of one airplane, basically. And so Boeing has to come out with a new airplane if it's going to stay in the commercial airliner business. And I'm assuming that it would like to stay in the business. Now, will that be done here in Puget Sound? I have serious doubts about that. I'm one of those that are really pretty negative on the future of Boeing here in Puget Sound. I think it's very possible that you could see Charleston become superseding Puget Sound as a producer. I think it's possible that San Antonio, Texas, where Boeing has a facility, that's where they're doing the Air Force One work, might be a contender for that. But I'm real pessimistic on the future of Boeing here in Puget Sound.
Well, if Boeing, they lose about $20 billion, COVID's still around, travel restrictions are still restricting. There were some fines and payouts too, right, for these two crashes?
Well, yes, of course, you naturally have civil liability lawsuits filed by the families of the victims in each case. And I believe Boeing had set aside $500 million initially to settle the Lion Air lawsuit. I'm not sure about the Ethiopian lawsuit. And then there was a deferred prosecution agreement entered into with the Department of Justice to settle the criminal probe that DOJ was doing. And even though it was headlined as about a $2.5 billion settlement with the Department of Justice, if you really look through the fine print on that, only $244 million of that was actually related to the criminal probe. Another $500 million was added, $400 or $500 million was added to that. So in the end, Boeing took an additional charge of $740 million, I think it was, against earnings for that settlement. But the other, $1.5 billion were basically monies that Boeing had already agreed to settle with its customers for the grounding and delayed airplanes and that sort of thing. So Boeing really came out of that deferred prosecution agreement with a slap on the wrist. And if you read the DPA, everything that happened at Boeing was the fault of these two test pilots. And I don't think anybody really believes that's the case.
No, I don't.
Yeah.
For sure.
So talk about a couple of scapegoats.
Yeah, that's hemorrhaging a lot of money as a corporation. Did they get stimulus or PPE help as well?
They declined that because the terms and conditions required them to give the government warrants or stock, and they didn't want to do that. Now, one thing that hasn't been
interesting.
Yeah, one thing that hasn't been asked or answered yet that I've seen is if any of this settlement is tax deductible. And the reason I raised that is that back in 2004, I believe it was, somewhere in that era, Boeing was fined $661 million by the federal government for trade secret theft and other misdeeds. And initially, they were going to deduct that from the taxes, and there was an outcry. And Boeing said that it wouldn't. Now, that's not to say that they didn't later on after everybody was looking the other way. But I wonder if any of this DPA is tax deductible.
That's a very interesting question.
Yes. Far be it from me to be a cynic.
All right. Well, let's talk about some local fare here in the island. You've been on the island about 4 years now? Is that what I recall?
2016, yeah.
Yeah, how are you liking it so far?
We really like it. Don't think much of the politics here. We moved here from Sammamish after being in Sammamish for 21 years, and I was very active in helping city councilmen get elected. I was on the planning commission over there and the planning advisory board for about 8 years to help write the comprehensive plan and the town center plan and deal with traffic concurrency and all that sort of stuff. So I came over here with some really good understanding of politics and land use planning. And I got to say, I'm blown away by how petty the politics over here is. I thought Sammamish was bad. It's amazingly bad over here.
You crack me up sometimes when you ask me questions about it, and I'm like, I think I know, but I probably don't know. And all I know is I could not work in that environment. I'd be pulling my hair out. The meetings are, even covering them as a pseudo journalist that I am, it's 4 hours a meeting, that goes nowhere, and it's just battle, and it's finger pointing, and it's name calling, and there's not a timeline of projects and costs and how it gets done. And then when something is finished or whatever, there comes another consultation or another review of what they voted to go ahead and go forward with. And then the ability for the public to interact and have a transparency in local government, it's difficult to keep your head on straight.
Yeah, you talk about a 4-hour meeting. Sammamish should be happy to have 4-hour meetings. Their most recent one on March 2nd, I think it was 5.5 hours. Well after midnight, and yeah, the pettiness and the cliques that are here on Bainbridge in our local political system are just eye rolling, and you've got people who are more interested in winning an argument,
yes,
than moving forward. This constant debate over a new police department. When we first moved here, they were talking about a police department over, I forget what the location was, but it turned out to be highly polluted. And so that went away, and I think there are probably good reasons for that. Then they were talking about buying some land, and one of them was over near the new fire department on Madison, or just off Madison, which struck me as a good place to have it. It's right there by 305. It's next to the fire department. Seems to me like that was a good possibility. Well, that went away. Then they bought Harrison Hospital for $9 million when the appraisal was $6 or $7 million or something like that. And
I think 9, yeah.
Well, yeah, and now there are some on the council who want to start over again. And it's like, well, what do you do with the building if you start over again? You're going to sell it for a loss? The time has come. They've been, from what the papers have said, they've been debating about the police department for what, 10 years, 15 years or something like that?
Yeah. It was pretty interesting having some old heads like Ian Ritchie and Johnny Evison, the author, that have grown up here, and they were telling me that we didn't even have police on the island when they were kids. The local police were in Bremerton, and they told this story that was kind of funny. They were having a kegger in the woods, and all the high school kids were drinking and stuff. And somebody came out and said, "I called the cops." And
It'll take an hour and a half.
yeah, and then Johnny was like, "We got 45 minutes to drink this beer."
Yeah. Well,
and now we got a $9 million police station that's not even cracked the door open yet.
Yeah, well, Sammamish was incorporated after being under King County rule, forever. And I was part of the incorporation campaign, supported it and all that. And for everything that's bad about Sammamish now, I still think it's better than being under King County rule, because nobody at King County really gave a damn about what happened to Sammamish. And I suspect that was probably pretty much the case here in Kitsap County. Bainbridge was just this little island that the county commissioners probably didn't really give a damn about. And you do want to be under local rule,
right?
But holy cow, this city council, the previous city council, the intrigue, the backbiting. You get council members who ignore public records requests. You get council members who ignore environmental laws. It's astounding. And if you're not part of the club, you don't get appointed to commissions. It's just amazing.
I would have used another word than amazing, but
family listening, I'm thinking.
What's your favorite restaurant here on the island? Where'd you go on date night Friday?
Well, we went down to the Thai restaurant on the waterfront. We really liked that place. We loved Cafe Nola when that was in business. Plate and Pint is okay, but it's it is what is it's a sports bar. We're really disappointed that there isn't a really good higher level restaurant. We loved Manor House when it was open. We like the Agate Cafe. That's a really nice place. Amelia Wynn. But, Amelia Wynn is good and we like it for the informality. But, if you want to go out for an anniversary or a really nice birthday dinner, probably the Agate Cafe is the best one on the island right now. Yeah,
it looks great, definitely. And the winery there looks quaint as well. I've heard the food's really good there. Have you tried Marché? Greg Atkinson's?
We've eaten at Cafe Marché, and I'm sorry, guys, we found the food to be kind of hit and miss.
Gotcha. That's all right. That's how it is. I mean,
well, I don't want to really diss local restaurants.
Right. It's tough enough.
But the best French food that we like is Place Pigalle over at Pike Place Market.
Good place.
Yeah.
Steamed squid there. Last time I was there, it was really good.
Yeah.
What do you see as the way to get past all this petty politics and start coexisting here on the island? Because there's the growth movement and then there's the rural movement, but it's like Democrats and Republicans. They don't mesh. I understand that Winslow was incorporated to make it a city so we could have police, and the station should be somewhere centrally located in that incorporation of the island. And for the most part, the rest of the island is pretty rural. But I think you should be allowed to build a house on a piece of property, and saving 65% of your property for vegetation, for aquifers and such it's pretty stressful if you really want to come here and retire and live your best life ever.
Yeah, well, understand that the 65% rule was kind of a hand-me-down from state Department of Ecology that really wasn't initially generated by the local government. We went through this over in Sammamish when I was on the Planning Commission. And the critical areas update, CAO update, was something that I was on the planning commission over there when we did that. And my tendencies are more environmental and slow growth, and let's not cut down trees. But I also recognize that a property owner needs to be able to work his property. Now, to me, that doesn't necessarily mean that you just willy-nilly grant an upzoning. There has to be a really good reason to grant an upzoning, in my view.
Mm-hmm.
It also means that for those who say, well, let's just downzone, which is a big debate over in Sammamish, you have to have a really good reason to force a downzoning on somebody because they've paid taxes for their whatever their zoning is, R4, R6, and now you're going to take that property away from them and downzone it to something less than that. I have a kind of a philosophical issue with that. But as we went through the CAO update over in Sammamish, I kept on saying, look, we're telling people yet again what they can't do with their property. Let's figure out a way with low impact development to tell them what they can do with their property.
Mm-hmm.
And that debate went nowhere on the planning commission. And I voted against the CAO update on a 6-1 vote because they wouldn't even have the discussion about, let's look at low impact development, see what we can do to make it feasible for property owners to actually do at least some of what they want to do with their property. And they wouldn't have that debate over there. And then it turned out that the citizens made such an uproar. It took them another 2 years to adopt a CAO update. And by that time, I was off the commission.
And
now
are you thoroughly briefed on the critical area ordinance here on the island?
I wouldn't say I was thoroughly briefed, but I certainly understood what was going on. And again, part of it was there was a state mandate to return to kind of pre-development levels on stuff, and you do have to be concerned about aquifers. And I know that there are some on the island who think that there's plenty of water that comes over from Kitsap County through the water pipeline from across the bridge there. And I don't know about that, but setting that aside, you still want to protect your aquifers. You just do. But with low impact development and stewardship, there are ways that you can do that. Now, one of the problems that we have is that under state law, all the rainfall belongs to the state. So you can't legally have your own water catchment in cisterns or rain barrels without going through all kinds of hoops. But legally, you aren't supposed to do that. And
I can't have a rain barrel at my garden?
Not legally.
I gotta get rid of the rain barrel.
Yeah, think about that one. The water all belongs to the state.
Wow.
Which I think there should be some reasonableness involved, like you can do a rain barrel or something like that. But here we have here on Bainbridge, something like 300,000 gallons of water a year is affluent water a year is escaping from our treatment center into Puget Sound or into the bay here, and instead of doing what it can to recapture that, and this is nothing new. This has been well understood on this island for years, and the city council just sort of says, well, it's too expensive to solve it. Think of how much of that water could go back into irrigation or anything like that and be recirculated on the island. Now, does that mean that you want to go ahead and start really opening up the island to development? Well, I don't. But there has to be reasonable use, and that's a principle under state law, by the way, reasonable use of your property. And if your property is zoned, and I'm just going to make this up, R4, and you have an acre, you do have setbacks that you have to worry about, particularly if you have sensitive areas on that. And so you have what's called net density calculations, which means that you might not be able to build 4 units per acre because of all this other stuff. But there's also the concept of clustering the development. that's where you would wind up getting into townhomes and condos and stuff like that.
Density building, which is kind of going on right now.
Yeah, but at the same time, the whole idea of putting affordable housing up there by the schools at Sportsman Club and what is it, New Brooklyn is to me lunacy, because that's not near anything except the schools. And affordable housing, you're presumably going to have elderly people as part of that affordable housing, and they would have to drive to anywhere or take a car or a cab or a bus.
What were they thinking? 60 units there, and there's all the children because there's three schools right there. It would have to build out a roundabout. Once again, there's a natural aquifer on that property. Where would the rainfall go if that dense square was just concrete and materials? What would go on with the water there? I think it'd be a bit of a nightmare for sure. And I also think that affordable housing area, I think it's a dead conversation now. It's been
I hope so
much.
Well, and here's the other thing. Most of the roads, pick a percentage, 90% of the roads, 95% of the roads, you get out of downtown Winslow and out of the brand new subdivisions, these are all rural-based roads.
Yeah, they're crumbling on the edges, no shoulders.
Yeah, they don't have edges, shoulders, they don't have bike lanes, they don't have sidewalks.
Mm-hmm.
And it is again, just to go back to this property at Sportsman Club, if they built this property or developed this property under state law, you can only require them to build a frontage sidewalk along the frontage of the property. You could not force them to build a sidewalk down to Madison because that's just not permitted under state law. So what does that mean? Well, that means either the city has to go ahead and improve the road, or you don't improve the road. Now you have a rural road with another big subdivision of some kind. And again, you wind up with a problem of how do you get around with it? And growth does not pay for growth. And anybody who says that it does is lying to you. I mean, there's just no other way to put about it. Because when it comes to building roads, again, under state law, the developer is only required to do his fair share of road improvements. You've got what's called background traffic, and that's all the traffic that exists there already before the development goes in. And improving the road on that background traffic is up to the city and the taxpayers. It's not up to the developer. The developer pays his fair share, a left turn lane, a right turn lane, putting the curbs in and the sidewalk in along his frontage. And maybe he'll have to contribute to a traffic light down here at Madison and some other place. But growth does not pay for growth.
Were you here when they were debating the bridge to nowhere, as I coined it?
Yes, I was.
$14 million to get from one side of the street to the other in a random spot.
Yeah, I could theoretically make an argument that those who live in Vineyard Lane would like to have a nice shortcut rather than going down to High School Road or whatever so that they could walk over to the QFC complex or to some of those other commercial areas there. But I would have to suggest that the number of people from Vineyard Lane who would do that would be very small.
Yep.
And it's certainly not going to be anybody who's going to Safeway for shopping, because they're going to have shopping bags and they're going to put that in your car. So there's a cost benefit analysis that I'm not sure was ever done. It looked to me like they got this grant and let's find a place to spend it. And that was it. But then you also get into the, the $15 million bond program that went down to overwhelming voter defeat. And
And that grant, I think, was $5 million, and the bridge was going to be 14. So we would have, as taxpayers, foot the bill for $9 million of it.
Yeah, it was crazy. And where could you take $9 million? And even that part of that $5 million grant, I'm sure it wasn't earmarked for the bridge. And what could you do for bike lanes?
You could buy a hospital and call it the new police station.
Yeah. But and then the $15 million road fund that was voted down, they didn't even have definitive road projects in mind. It was like it was a slush fund. And God help you if you give this council a slush fund.
The mobility legislation too that got shot down.
That's what I'm talking about.
Yeah, that was like it would cost $1 million a block to grow that out, and it would take 20 years or something like that, I believe. Of course, this is bystander, so no fact checking allowed, people.
Yeah. It was an incredibly poorly thought out.
I agree.
Bond fund, and it deserved to be voted down, and it went down in flames.
Yeah, I mean, even the mayor came on this program and said, "I got my voters pamphlet in the mail," and I was like, "Who wrote this?" You could not define where the money was going.
Yeah.
At all.
Yeah.
And it's something that's needed too.
Yeah. And I've got my beef with bicyclists who don't ignore or who don't pay attention to rules of the road. I get really annoyed at them. I've had bicyclists blow through stop signs right in front of me.
Well, now you can roll through them.
Yes, well,
prior to this year.
Anyway, that's a whole different topic.
But I know you're talking about bicyclists here. I get into these arguments a lot. So
yeah, but
should I have to pay a tab for my bicycle? Because
I think you should.
I'm okay with that.
But you've got Fletcher Bay and Miller Road, which is a major arterial.
Yes,
and it needs bike lanes. Take some of that mobility money and do that all the way up to 305.
Well, they did widen the road there. They spent some money there
in spots, but I really question the priorities that the city staff and the city council come up with.
Yeah, I mean, I do drive a car. I do ride a bike. There's a huge bicycling community here. We have a huge event called the Chili Hilly, a 32-mile bike event. But I start to see the counter arguments too, that these bicyclists come over here, especially for the Chili Hilly. The ferry fee is waived that day. Our island is incredibly busy for 8 to 10 hours with the bicycling event, and we have to have staff and volunteers and police out there, and it disrupts the regular islanders' day, right? So nobody can get on the ferry during that day a lot of the times unless they walk on, because it's just littered with bicycles. They come drive around, they don't stay here and spend money. There's a big push to dislike bicyclists around here. And when you couple that with the lack of mobility around the island, with the crumbling sidelines of the roads and no real bike lane plan, it can be a place where we butt heads with cyclists for sure.
Well, and we've got this current debate about whether or not to dedicate Grand Forest North to mountain bikers.
Yeah, that's some newbie. That ain't happening.
Well, okay, that's fine, but I actually don't object to the idea of having a dedicated place where the mountain bikers can go do their thing. We had that over near Sammamish in a place called Duthie Hill Park. That was dedicated for mountain bikers to go off, and they had the ramps and they had the berms and all that stuff. And I don't have a philosophical problem with that. Is Grand Forest North the best place? I don't know. I've actually never walked through Grand Forest North.
I walk through there often, and I like it being a dense forest. And there's also those little mountain bike ramp things at Battle Point Park now, just outside the roller hockey rink. There's also a short drive to Hurricane Ridge, where there's all kinds of mountain biking going on.
Well, it's not that short to Hurricane Ridge.
Well, get outdoors.
Couple hours. But the objection that I have to the bicyclists is that they think that some of them, I get a bunch of hate mail here going on. There's a lot of them who think that they own the roads and the rules of the roads don't apply to them. Mm-hmm. And again, over in Sammamish, we had the Burke-Gilman Trail that went along the East Lake.
Rode it for most of my life as a
trail, and without getting into all the politics that went into developing the East Lake Sammamish Trail, which I've walked many a time and enjoyed it when I lived there. Some of the development of that really required the county, which owns the trail, to work with the homeowners, that some of whom illegally encroached on the right-of-way, but some of whom they built their homes with the permitting of King County before Sammamish was incorporated. And the Cascade Bicycle Club really pressed very hard to get that East Lake Sammamish Trail approved. And they didn't give a damn about how King County was operating as a thug against some of the homeowners there. Mm-hmm. And the city of Sammamish had to step up and defend the homeowners. And some of that litigation goes on to this day.
It's a lot of logistics to it.
Yep.
All right, let's wrap this conversation up for now. And I look forward to having a beer with you down the road, talking more.
Yeah, well, we're getting pretty close where we can do that again.
Yeah, don't be afraid to pick up the phone. Tell people where they can get your newsletter and kind of what it pertains.
Yeah, the newsletter is at leehamnews.com, leehamnews.com. We have a combination of free wall and paywall content on it. It covers commercial aviation. It principally focuses on Airbus and Boeing, but we do get into other related topics, so supply chain and what have you. We do analysis and breaking news type of stuff. And in fact, we on occasion do some featurettes that have really little to do with today's aviation. I've flown on the Douglas DC-7 and DC-3, and I've done some write-ups about that. I'm working on a story as we speak about the Berlin Airlift Association, and they're restoring a C-54 that was involved in the Berlin Airlift, and so it's an interesting little site, and there's again a paywall feature as well as a lot of free content.
Awesome. Do airline industry people invite you out? Say, hey, come test ride this new trick pony I got?
Not so much anymore. Occasionally, I was actually invited to the Alaska Airlines entry into service of the MAX on March 1st. The only trouble was you had to be at the airport at 4 a.m. and I just, if I would have had to go over and spend a night in a hotel. Of course, the first ferry isn't until 4:45, and I just wasn't willing to do that.
Yeah, I hear you. All right, Scott Hamilton, Leeham News. I appreciate your time today. I look forward to seeing you soon.
Yep, me too.
Be kind.